Be not silent, O God of my praise. For wicked and deceitful mouths are opened against me, speaking against me with lying tongues. They encircle me with words of hate and attack me without cause. In return for my love, they accuse me, but I give myself to prayer. Help me, O Lord my God. Save me according to your steadfast love. Let them know that this is your hand. You, O Lord, have done it. With my mouth I will give great thanks to the Lord. I will praise him in the midst of the throng, for he stands at the right hand of the needy one, to save him from those who condemn his soul to death. Welcome to the Neighborhood Church Revive podcast. We're so glad you are here joining us today as we unpack big ideas about God's Word together. My name is Shawn Thomas. I'm an associate campus pastor here at Neighborhood Church, and we believe that God's Word is relevant and helpful even for today, which is why we take the time to unpack what it says, to connect with you guys, our listeners, out in podcast land. And today is an extra special day today because we are joined by the Creative Arts team.
Woo! Yeah.
Hi.
All right, we're going to go around the horn really quick, starting with Mr. Colson. Introduce yourselves.
Colson Barkley.
What do you do, Colson Barkley?
I am, what do we call me? We call me the worship architect.
Basically, if you've seen The Matrix, imagine the architect as Colson.
Yes, I need the white suit, right? So I put the songs together. I manage the worship team, I lead the worship team, and help make the experience, the music part experience of the worship services. That's a broad summary of what that means.
Perfect, Miss Haylie.
And I am Haylie Barkley. I am Colson's wife. Not sibling, just to clarify. And I help make up the other half of putting our Sunday services together, where Colson is the worship architect. My title is service producer. So all of the non-musical portions of our Sunday worship services fall to me. So I am in charge of all of our tech volunteers. I'm in charge of making sure that we have a thorough outline, a run sheet. We have all the slides, all the details, all the people know where they need to be, and we have all the materials prepped so that Sundays go off without a hitch, hopefully.
Yeah. Mr. Bob Wilson.
As Mike puts it, I'm in charge of everything that plugs in.
Yes.
So as far as for the worship arts is concerned, but I also do a lot of creative designing things and such. The other job that I've had at the church before that was basically building superintendent. So something breaks in the building, toilet, or anything else, a wall, I fix it.
Plumbing, things like, either things that plug in or come into the building in some sense.
Yep, and even the ones that go out sometimes.
There's everybody plays a role.
Yeah,
and then I'm also on the worship team, more over at LaSalle. But it's awesome to be here together as a team. We're here in the clubhouse over at the Cypress campus. I know those of you in the audience who are listening, oftentimes it's either Pastor Mike, Pastor Justin, one of the speakers who usually does the podcast. But the worship arts team, as you guys have heard, our roles, we are an integral part of what you experience Sunday to Sunday. And with, this past week, it was Memorial Day, so our schedules got a little off. Every now and then we have kind of like a fun episode. So not that the other ones aren't fun. The other ones.
Are you saying we're fun, Shawn?
I'm saying everybody's fun, but in different ways. In different ways. Pastors Mike and Justin, when they talk, they're so fun.
They're so fun.
With theological goodness.
They don't even listen to these. It's fun.
But we're fun too, because we can kind of be like, But so for those of you guys listening, last Sunday The sermon topic was on Psalm 109, and as you guys heard, it's kind of a psalm that's a bit rough around the edges, if you will. You know, there's definitely parts of the Bible that the whole Bible is very real and raw, but there's certainly parts that are like, oh, this is probably inappropriate for our elementary kids, you know, and stuff like that, or this takes a lot of context to explain. So, for those of you listening, check out Psalm 109. We have a little video that you can watch about some pieces of Psalm 109, but it's really a heavy topic about David being attacked and being oppressed, and then he's kind of in the pit and being harassed, but then he kind of comes back to the idea of, God, please save me. You're the one who I call out to. Despite all the other bad stuff, I'm going to cling to you. And so that's what we're kind of unpacking. And as we were talking about this, and then this week we were doing a little staff debrief, an idea popped into my head. I don't know if anybody listening in the audience has seen the book or has seen the movie or read the books, The Lord of the Rings.
Woo.
I think Colson has. Bob, maybe.
I wonder if anyone else has.
Most certainly.
Certainly no one else in the world. Though.
Yeah. We're the only four people,
right? Yeah.
Aside from Peter Jackson and Tolkien, who wrote that. No. You guys at home are like, yeah, Lord of the Rings. Yeah. So specifically, there's a part, and if you have your Lord of the Rings copy handy, like I do in my, my car, I'm like, oh yeah, of course, I need this. But there's a few scenes in the movies I'm thinking of at the end of the Two Towers, and then kind of in the middle of, or even in the end of the Return of the King, where Sam is talking, to Frodo and talking about the old stories that are inspiring and kind of like these heroes of old, and they somehow persevere and push through, and those were inspiring to them. And then Bob, you talked about, well, what will our story be like? Sam asks.
Yeah.
And in my mind, I kind of made the link to, when David was in this terrible spot, when we, in today's day and age, obviously we've had some tragic things that have happened in the world, in our country, in the last month, really. What do we do in those times of despair, of trouble? What do we do? And that scene popped out to me as Sam, Frodo was at some of his lowest points, right? Should we go on? What can we do against such evil? And then Sam has this inspiring kind of message, and so, yeah, I just wanted to unpack with the arts team. What do you guys think about that? Or am I way off base?
Boof. I mean, I'm such a Lord of the Rings fan. Grew up loving the movies. I was 10 when they started coming out, maybe 9. No, 10. Loved the movies. I've never been a book reader, but then got into audiobooks about 5 years ago. Suddenly realized, wait, I could read Lord of the Rings now. And so I've gone through it 6 times now in those 5 years, 5 years ago.
Listening through the audiobooks.
Listening through the audiobooks, yeah. There's a great one by Andy Serkis now, the Gollum actor. Wow. Plug for that. Anyway, so just because I'm a huge fan and not a reader of other books, it just blows me away every time. Maybe because I'm not super well read, but I do know they're quality books. Yeah. So I happen to know there's kind of 2 points Sam talks to Frodo sort of in that language. I think in the end of the Two Towers movie, there's a really good one. What are we holding on to, Sam? That there's good in this world and it's worth fighting for. Yeah. That's, an easy one to quote. Yes. But I think this discussion, because, evil is daggone real. And, we feel it more poignantly this week, maybe than other weeks, unless you are going through something really tough, which a lot of us are. Okay, so the point I'm thinking of is I believe they've gone into the Morgul Vale. They've gone, Frodo and Sam, I'm quoting the books now, this is the end of, or the second half of Two Towers books. Frodo and Sam and Gollum are climbing the stairs to get to Shelob's lair. They have no idea that Shelob is up there.
Spoilers, a giant scary spider, I think, right?
Spider-like is just the best way to describe her. She's worse than spiders. And there's this big, long conversation they have that doesn't feel long to me because I love it, about, the stories that inspired Sam, everybody in their world. of like heroism and where good wins in the end. And Sam is pointing out, well, maybe you don't really hear about stories of people where it's not a good ending for them because the stories don't get passed on. And he's like really acknowledging like the stories that are best to hear about aren't necessarily the ones you want to get landed in. That's how he puts it. You don't want to get yourself landed in one of those stories because maybe they're best to hear about it because they overcome the most evil. And so he references
other stories are just people fixing their sinks. It's a hard situation, but they overcome the evil of a clogged sink.
Right, yeah. And so I like really recommend looking up that passage. Maybe I need to look it up right now.
Yeah, well, Bob and Haylie.
To do that.
Yeah. Why don't you guys? Yeah, do that, Colson. But Bob and Haylie, I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts too. Even other forms of literature. It doesn't have to be Lord of the Rings.
Well, no, I can sort of piggyback on what Colson was sort of talking about, in the sense that like going with the whole Sam and talking about a story being told sort of thing.
Yeah.
Like the whole, and then the dealing with such an evil, like those we often hear stories that we're talking about Lord of the Rings, but even Star Wars is similar in the sense of it being an ultimate evil that needs to be defeated kind of thing. Obviously, completely different background and backdrop, but
like an archetypal.
It's still a sort of hero's journey, which is ubiquitous in literature as well as film and TV. And then I'm also thinking of just storytelling in general. No story is any good without a good villain kind of thing. But as Colson was talking about, I would agree, there is sort of a limit to what evil people can take. And so like Star Wars, for just keeping that with example, it's like the evil that is the Emperor is sort of like everyday evil. Like we've all not necessarily intimately experienced it. Like we didn't grow up with Hitler as like our, all supreme leader.
Era.
Right. But we all, through history classes and just documentaries or movies themselves also, we get a sense of what that kind of thing was. But I mean, I don't mean to say that was a conquerable evil because that's sort of hindsight being 2020.
Yeah.
But I'm struggling to think of an example mainly because it's sort of an unthinkable thing. Like what if that is true? Like it's a story that doesn't want to be told.
Yeah, like where evil wins.
Well, even if evil doesn't win, what if it's like a tie? Where it's like, evil stops, if you will, but like it being a good ending isn't really because there's like one person left in the whole battle out of thousands kind of thing.
It's not satisfying. The degree to which maybe the good guys have won isn't enough, it feels like, to give validity to the pain they experience.
Right.
What comes to mind is it kind of relates to kind of what we're talking about. So we had the Afghanistan withdrawal recently, and that probably, I think, for a lot of people feels like a situation, like a draw in a sense of like we were there for so long, so many people died, and that was the kernel of that kind of came from 9/11, which was horrific in and of itself, and then we kind of just left. And there was a bombing, and 13 service people died. And then the people who are left there, who even helped us, what's going to happen with them, other missionaries? And it feels there's this kind of gut punch, I think, for a lot of people. And what I think of when I think of that, I live, so we're, for those of you listening and just for the arts team to know, we have a lot of listeners in other countries and other states. And so awesome. Thank you. Shout out to the audience.
Yeah. Oh, hello.
So we are in Southern California, right? And I have, we're looking out the window. It's beautiful,
Southern California.
It is warm today.
It is.
$7 gas in Southern California.
So we kind of stay
That's
put,
how we
basically. That's not the evil that I'm speaking of, but one of them.
That is the evil what we should talk about. No, I'm kidding.
But what I think is, so that's a long way to say that I have friends who live in Garden Grove, and I've gone to events in Garden Grove. And for those of you who live in Southern California, especially Garden Grove, there's a Little Saigon. And it's interesting because when we pulled out of Vietnam, there was a huge Catholic population of Vietnamese folks who were horrifically, even before, during the war, back in the 60s and the 70s, were persecuted, the long history, but after we left, they fled the country, and it was a similar thing, in a sense, to the Afghanistan situation. But the reason why I bring that up is because I've gone to a few events in the city where I've met 50-year-old folks, 60-year-old, folks that aren't like, because I think of World War II, I think of my elderly great-grandparents or something, or the stories I see online or on YouTube or whatever. Right. But these are folks that are kind of my parents' age, maybe younger, who had to flee for their lives and thankfully have put up roots here and have changed things or taken a new trajectory. Mm-hmm. So there is those stories, I think, and to go back to what Sam was saying, like, and even what we're saying, like, I feel like spans of time, it is easy to have hindsight as 2020, but it's also encouraging to see that, that God somehow is fighting through these things. His will transcends history in a sense, and obviously we can point to Christ, and kind of things that have gone on since his, sacrifice and resurrection, that there does seem to be a push or trajectory, if you will, of kind of God orchestrating things, even though there is evil that perpetuates in this world. But it's something that we struggle with. Again, so for those of you listening, we're recording this podcast the first few days of June. So there was a shooting in Oklahoma last night at a hospital. There was an elementary school in Uvalde, Texas, 20 kids killed, 2 teachers. The Buffalo shooting, 10 people out there. A church right here in Southern California, a shooting, and obviously... this is kind of a heavy topic so for you guys listening, but to go back to our scripture passage, that was completely relevant to what their time and experience was, because, it was hard to live, 4,000 years ago, that was a lot of hard stuff.
Horrible stuff throughout human history.
Yeah. And so what do we do with that?
What do we do with that? Right. Oof.
I'm asking you specifically.
My head and heart just jumps to Lord of the Rings because it's just easier to talk about than real life.
Well, if I could, so sort of keeping with the theme that we've already kind of been going with, it's almost like we're living in the story that's too terrible to tell, Yeah. And so when we look through scripture and going back to the Psalm 109, where it's like David spends 25, 26 verses talking about all the woes that he goes through, but at the end, there's not a accusation. It just jumps straight to help me. Like he already knows that this is not God's fault. It's not. That's not a part of his equation. It's not even in his mindset. And I'm not trying to say that we should or shouldn't. I'm just pointing out what I see in the passage.
He is accusing like the people who are
the people,
but not God. That's
exactly.
What you're saying. I got you.
Right. Whereas more often what we seem to hear lately is why does God let this happen? And so I just find it interesting that David's not even mentioning that.
David's, he's not like at the end of all his sufferings or woes, he's not like, so therefore, God, I'm walking away from you. Mm-hmm. Right. It says, therefore.
It's not even conditional.
Yeah. He just says,
this is what goes on. I already know. Sort of what Mike said when we were having our little Bible study we had that Shawn was just referencing. Yeah. Mike said or brought up something that somebody had told him. Life sucks. It just sucks. Mm-hmm. Like, and so it's almost as if putting that with David's thing, it's like David it's already there. And the only saving grace in general comes from God. So that's who you ask for. But we're all sinners. And so part of my own thing is just, we're all sinners. And so like, it's always coming to ask God, like, like, I know that I don't really deserve it, God, but can you help me? Save me with your steadfast love. With my mouth I give thanks, but that's all I really have to give.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that idea that our lives can suck. Like there can be seasons of life that suck. The reality is that, sometimes it just sucks. And that doesn't, I think so often, one of the powerful things about storytelling is how, of course, we see ourselves in the stories that we read or that we see. And it would be no fun to imagine yourself in that position of being in a story that just sucked. No one wants that. You only want that if on the other end there is the vanquishing, there's the conquering, or there's the happily ever after that, yes, feels like it validates all of it. And I know that in myself, at least, it's so easy to want to see myself as the main character in a story or in my life story. And I am in some ways that, the Lord sees me as the individual he made me, and he cares about me as an individual. But his plan and his story is so much greater than my own.
Yeah.
And when I so often need to remember to put it in that context, that if the story, if I have the realistic idea that this story that I'm actually a part of is so much greater than mine, I think it's easier for me to imagine or to see the hope that obviously the idea of a happy ending at the end, even if the portion of the story that maybe I feel like I'm in feels awful sometimes, even if that's what might be a part, or that might be the tone of most of the story I'm a part of, that doesn't mean that this whole story is that. And I think I always have a hard time. I always have a hard time balancing those two ideas, because I say that, and it's easy if I have that perspective. It's easy to then think of myself as not mattering, and that's not true either. So this is much easier said than fully felt and absorbed and realized, that the Lord does love and care for me and the story of my life. And that, yes, that does matter. But yes, and maybe I might feel like my story sucks, but it is a part of a greater tapestry. Your thread in a tapestry, to quote the Prince of Egypt.
Another good one. So now diverting to Prince of Egypt talk.
Such a good movie.
So for you listening at home, few tasks for you guys. Listen to the Lord of the Rings audiobooks, watch Star Wars, watch the Prince of Egypt, and sing the songs.
Really study the soundtrack to the Prince of Egypt, guys. Everyone should just have that in their being, playing at all times.
Yeah, but I really appreciate what you're saying, Haylie, about kind of like there's our story that moment by moment, or from time to time, day to day, year to year, it can be good or bad, right? There's sin in the world, there's hardships, but we're a grain of sand, we're a speck of space dust in the cosmos, compared to God's
Beach.
Overarching beach.
Or universe.
His universe, like the approximation, and so it kind of reminds me of the passage, God has prepared good works for us to do in advance. And I'm kind of conflating two different verses, I think, but it's all things work together for good, for His glory, right? And it's funny. I know the cliche is to interpret that verse as like, whatever I'm going through, it's going to work out for my good, or it's going to be good for me in the end, or but it's like, well,
it may not be your good.
Yeah, there's the greater good of the story that we all hearken to is God's meta-narrative, if you want to use that language, of redeeming the world through His Son to then make all things right at the end of time as we know it. But that story even continues, right? And it's, in a sense, we do participate in the everlasting life,
Right.
you know, and that connection. So there is an ultimate goodness, but our momentary affliction is maybe something that we have to wrestle through. That refines us to connect with God, but that harkens to something even greater than our own story.
Right. That, going back to Lord of the Rings, to Dear Sam, that, yes, the idea that, you know, what kind of story have we found of ourselves, or that we landed in?
Have we landed ourselves in?
Right. That, though, knowing the Lord it means that we do know what kind of story we are in the long game.
Yeah.
We know what
Yeah.
his story is, and if you know, like, we don't know what, yes, our portion of that story will be like again, but yeah, so we can feel what Sam says feels so. I like really hits home to me when I just think about the feelings of my own life, and yes, my own story. But yeah, on the flip side, having the peace of, yeah, I do know at the end the ultimate story I am a part of, that I am landed in.
So let me ask you guys, as we're getting towards the second half, or the last half of the podcast, because we know you guys are listening. Some of you guys listen in the car. That's cool. Some of you guys, if you're listening by the poolside and hanging out, you can flip over your tape. Do people use tapes anymore?
At the sound of this chime, you may flip over the tape.
Oh,
I
my
saw
goodness.
an awesome meme today. I'll pass it on to you. So 1991, within like 2 months, all these amazing albums came out, and they were all stacked on as cassette tapes.
Oh,
And
my
I was
gosh.
like, what? And they're like, and this is just, I'm nerding out. It was like Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Metallica, you know, like all these classics.
Soundgarden.
Yes, that was one of them.
Yeah.
It was like,
Bush.
and so, you know, for us, yeah.
I was
So-
going to say, Colson and
10
I
years
are,
before
are
y'all.
a decade younger than the other two men in this
Full
room.
decade removed.
So he's talking about 1991, and that was the year I was born, so I don't remember this.
I was in junior high.
but good things happened.
right.
Good things
They
for you
happened.
guys and for us.
I remember cassette tapes vividly. It was just that they were like the lullabies that I was listening to as I went to sleep,
Right.
not so much Nirvana.
Speaking of
Mine were 8 tracks.
Yeah, well, that's probably good to not have a lullaby like that. Speaking of stories, though, Muppets, though I loved the Muppets.
yeah.
Muppets.
We used to have the story, like the cassette tape stories, and you would follow along with the book. And there was one like the really scary, you know how there's always like the Christmas episode,
Halloween episode.
Yeah, and the Muppets Halloween episode freaked me out.
Oh, I'm gonna have to look that up.
Yeah,
That sounds
I
right
can't
up
even
Bob's
remember,
alley.
but it was like
Straight up mine.
haunted house, but it like I remember feeling scared. I don't remember what happens, but anyway. So my question for you guys is: we talked about Star Wars, Prince of Egypt, obviously Lord of the Rings. Is there another story, literary, film, whatever it might be, that you guys think of when you think of like whether it's good triumphing over evil, just an uplifting story, or even a part? Hey, let's bring it home. Your own story.
Oh.
To keep it real, as they say. But like,
Did they say it like that?
Like,
I don't know if anybody said that.
like, and are you specifically looking for good conquering evil, or how evil, like a more realistic take on evil?
Well, let's try and keep it positive, I guess.
Okay,
or
okay.
let's try and keep it inspiring. So like,
And by realistic, I do want to confirm it is realistic that good conquers evil,
Yes,
just in the long run.
yeah. Well,
all I
that's-
mean by that.
Yeah, and I guess in my mind, I like, again, like going back to what we started with, you know, like story, I believe, helps us cope,
Yes.
but also inspires us to actually act heroically in real life,
Yes.
because we hear these stories of,
Yes.
we just had Memorial Day, people sacrificing their lives literally, right? You know, but you know, we have stories that we are inspired by, that we see, that we can hold on to. These stories in the Bible, these are historical stories that we believe, but so much time has passed, they become archetypal in a sense of good triumphing over evil and perseverance and pressing on. So whether they're more recent stories that you guys just really enjoy, or like a time in your life where you're like, wow, you know, like I stood up to that bully at lunch. I didn't give him my lunch money, and I'm a better person for it. And as always, guys, we can cut and so just FYI, so we can take some time to think. Or Haylie, if you got something. Yeah.
It looks like she's got
The first thing that comes to mind for me is a bit more on that simplistic end of stories, because it is of childhood. But what you're saying rings so true to me, that how stories can inspire you to feel heroic or hopeful, that you can see yourself or make sense of your life through stories. That when I was growing up, I had friends who weren't necessarily kind. I was a pretty shy kid. And so my bullies, I can look back and acknowledge they were bullies. But they were under the title of friend at that age. And I didn't know I could leave their friendship, if that makes sense. That didn't feel like a nice thing to do. And I wanted to be nice.
Yeah.
And I have these vivid moments. Again, I was born in the early 90s. And so right during the Disney Renaissance era. So I got to grow up when all of I'm trying to think, like Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast,
Classic.
Lion King, Mulan, Tarzan,
The Rescuers Down Under.
There were just
Those eagles.
so
Save the
mad.
eagles.
Those eagles, saving the eagles, man.
Marahute is freaking awesome.
Yes, you know what? It's true.
Wait, I've never heard of this. Mata what now?
Marahute, that's the name of the bird in Rescuers Down Under.
Yeah, with the beautiful feathers.
Yeah.
I've only seen that once
I've
in my
seen-
life.
Oh, I definitely watched that a couple months ago. Again, for the fun of it
All
on
right,
Disney Plus.
neighborhood
Hey.
church screening of the Rescuers
Yes.
Down Under.
So good. But yes, that for me as a kid, my two favorite movies were Beauty and the Beast and Cinderella. And I can remember having moments in young elementary school where it occurred to me that first opening song in Beauty and the Beast, it's called Belle, where she's walking through town, that all of the townspeople the whole song's at them commenting that she's odd. That it's a pity she's so odd. Because if she wasn't so odd, if there weren't so many things for us to notice about her that are different from us, that maybe that she'd fit in. And I can remember thinking to myself, okay, I feel this way. I feel this way when I go to school. I feel like every little thing I do, and I'm just doing things that are me. Everything feels like it gets picked apart, and gets called out. But Belle goes through the whole story and stays true to herself, that she doesn't change herself one bit for any of it. And in the end, she actually finds herself in a place that is such a incredible fit for who she is. And granted, there's a lot more in the story as well, but that was one of those things as a kid I pulled out of it, that, okay, here's a character that I admire through my little kid eyes, and honestly through my adult eyes too. And yes, that she didn't change herself just so that things wouldn't get picked on about her. And there can be hope that there will be people who understand at some point. And then likewise with Cinderella, I feel like Cinderella sometimes gets a rap of being like a doormat. But what I saw when I was a kid was that here she was with these people every single day being absolutely cruel to her.
Yeah, dude.
So cruel. And she always chose kindness. And in fact, if you watch the movie, she can be a little sassy sometimes. People act like she's a doormat, but she's that part that she always ultimately chose kindness. And I love in the Disney live action remake that they even have the character turn around at the end as she's leaving and say, I forgive you.
Wow.
To her stepmother. Not that her stepmother said, I'm sorry, but that she just turns around. She's holding nothing against her.
A lifetime.
Yeah, a lifetime of being treated cruelly and having awful things said to her. And again, so little Haylie, that was another thing for me that these stories
inspiring.
encouraged me that, like that not even like, oh, if I do this, then I get the happily ever after. No,
Yeah.
it was just the idea of, oh, these characters have situations that I see myself in, and look how they're handling it. I can do that too, because if that's what the hero of the story does, even if like they can't see that there is going to be a happy ending, then I can do the heroic thing in these moments.
And that feels like tangible heroism.
Yes.
Because I think it's also cool, like, these huge over the top stories, but that is like the ability to forgive, like a lifetime of cruelty. Like, even if it's just like, oh, I'm the stepsister who's kind of does all the laundry and everything like that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, well, that's really an awesome, inspiring. Yeah, like I can do that too. Hey, another random movie with forgiveness in it.
Yes.
Spider-Man 3, the Sam Raimi films, bad movie. Like, not good. But the very end, I remember seeing it in the theater. I almost swooned because this like character that killed Spider-Man's uncle and stuff like that, Peter Parker says, I forgive you. And that's how it ends. And I was like, and that's like, there's not movies about forgiveness as a concept or as a thing, at least not many. And when there are.
Avatar: Last Airbender, it's in the 3rd season. So
I hear
turn it off.
people
the TV
talk
show.
about
Not the
Not the movie.
I hear
That
Do
does
not
exist.
besmudge this
Okay.
podcast with that.
This is a spoiler. This is a spoiler. So
M.
turn
Night
off for 10
Shyamalan.
seconds. But 3rd season. Okay, 3rd season. Iroh forgiving Zuko. Like Zuko finally comes back after so long, and then apologizes, tears, and just immediate hug, welcome back, prodigal son moment.
Whoa. Dude, that's I've not I mean, I'm aware of it, but see, this is another age. So like Bob and I are kind of like, oh yeah, I've heard of that.
Well, yeah. I will point out though that my best friend was all about Last Airbender, probably whenever you started all about it too. So I could have been, but I was just like, I mean, me and him, it's like, yeah, you have your own thing.
yeah, I'll let you handle that one.
Yeah. You come around when you've got a new horror movie to talk about.
I know you said other than Lord of the Rings, but
Hey, go ahead. There's no shackles here.
just the ending for all characters. Tim Keller, a pastor in New York, has a lecture on Lord of the Rings that I heard years ago, points out that all the characters are so realistic. Even though it's such a fantastical world, there's good and evil in every character, and we can see ourselves in every character in different ways. So as you asked your question, I'm thinking, okay, how did things end for Frodo? Frodo, if you know the story, is, you could say, if you're just looking at it surface level, the hero, he destroys the ring and saves the world. But that's not how the story's told exactly. Frodo is suffering worse and worse, finally destroys the ring, but the book is only 2/3 over, and like the end is like 1/3 of the book. And then they go home, and home isn't quite set, and they can never perfectly reset home because of how messed up home was after, months of being away. And when they do reset home, a lot of things are way better than they could have possibly been had not all the evil happened, and a lot of things can't go back, including Frodo. In the movie, they succinct it with a great line. They summarize with a great line. I don't know that word.
In a very succinct way.
Succinctly summarized.
They summarize. In the movie, there's some. Oh, now I can't remember the line. But it's something to the effect of some evils are too bad, or some wounds
too
cut
deep,
too deep.
Yeah.
And in the book, there's more words, and you feel it more. He spends, I forget, 3 to 5 years at home, and just he can't be at peace there. It's just like the wound he got, and the amount of time he had with the evil ring. He has to leave Middle-earth, so his quote-unquote happy ending is that he's saved home, but not for him, and he leaves and goes to, what's only vaguely referenced in the trilogy as the heaven. There's other lore; it's all described more, and it is like higher power.
Well, a better land.
It's a better land, yeah.
One way of looking at it is better than Middle Earth.
Yeah. And holy cow, that's like the resolution of evil I've seen so far in my short life. I'm 31. How old am I? 32. I'm 32 now. I look to my wife. That like God, in most cases, has not resolved evil in the way I want or expect. And here Frodo does not get to go home. He never gets to have home again. He gets to go to the home that his heart was made for, and that's how I interpret it as a Christian, to like a way better home. That's how things end for Frodo. It wasn't like a happy ending. It was a happier, melancholy ending. No, a happier ending with melancholy in it, I would say.
And I think that's part of I think that's beautiful. Like that's the reality of the fallen worlds.
Yes, and it turns out better than if it hadn't been fallen.
Yeah.
And I have faith, and so far I've seen that in this world.
Yeah.
For in my life so far, I've seen that every time I've seen, some closure to a mini story of God's. Like there's always a sadness to it because it didn't resolve the way the person or I wanted it to, but it resolves better. Like I am closer to God after some stuff I've gone through. Yeah. Whereas Sam, then in Lord of the Rings, the way it ends for Sam, he only carried the ring a little bit, and basically his mind is, in some way, he's got a low IQ and a heck of a lot of wisdom.
Yeah.
So evil didn't affect him as deeply. But he loses his best, closest friend.
Yeah.
And he gets married and has kids and is happier and transitions that. But that's not the happiest of endings that Sam would have wished for. And he's so sad the party tree is cut down in the Shire. But because of the journey, he put the Malorn tree that Galadriel gave him, and it's way better than the party tree, but it's still not home. It's not what he grew up with. And so but it's better. It's a melancholy, absolutely better home.
It's changed.
It's changed, yeah. And so evil affects everything, and God always uses it to make it better. Maybe not in our lifetimes. And like in my insecurities, I look at how the story ends for Gollum. Like, okay, there's parts of my heart that are Gollum. And even he's the one that actually destroyed the ring. He's the one that is the hero, you could say.
accomplished
And
the task.
the book is a little more explicit on that. They weren't fighting like in the movie. It makes a better ending in the movie, the way they did it. But he gets the ring, yeah. And in his foolishness, he just dances accidentally off the cliff.
Oh, that's right. He
Which to me,
trips basically.
Yeah.
It works
it's
better
not
in
like a
literature
fight.
than it does in a video.
Yeah,
or
it
a
would
movie.
be pretty
Yeah,
lame
like
in a
a
movie.
movie,
It's a good decision.
Not dramatic
Thank you,
at all.
Peter Jackson, for making that decision.
If you're listening, Peter Jackson,
Yes.
well done.
Call me, actually.
Yeah. You call me.
If you're actually listening to this,
But just to
call
say,
me.
in the book, I think the poignancy to the way it happened is that, yes, most people, the people most taken by evil are still worked for good. Like, okay, God can still use me, even if I completely succumb to evil or completely succumb to my own devices, and God still works out good. I that's the realistic look on evil that I see in Lord of the Rings. Yeah, I'm done. Thank you.
Also, I was just going to say we're getting up to 40 minutes here, so we're going to wrap it up. But any brief parting thoughts from Bob or Haylie? But this is good conversation.
I mean, all I would have had was my own pick for movie, to answer your question, and so I'll just do it real quick because it's sort of solidified as they were talking. But I'm not going to say that I loved this movie, but I definitely thought I liked the bravery, I guess, of the story choices. And it's funny because you kept saying home. Spider-Man No Way Home.
Oh yeah, that was a good movie.
Sure, but I just thought it was such a brave ending to, instead of just defeat the villains. I mean, they even sort of toy with the fact that they're not really curing or helping or something, but it's sort of they're resolving what made the villains villainous. That's kind of, and sort of like how we just talk about the Christian things we pull from forgiveness in Spider-Man 3 and Cinderella, the live action version.
Yes.
That's old. His Spider-Man striving to fix whatever was wrong was to help people. It wasn't to strike down the bad.
Yeah.
It was a problem to tackle. It wasn't which and in some ways I also thought was kind of a weird choice because it's like you're making a superhero movie, you got to have fights.
Yeah.
So that's why I said brave, because it's like
It's an interesting choice. Yeah.
But and then we were talking about like what makes a better ending, and it's like I know from storytelling classes that a bittersweet ending usually has more resonance for people because we live in something that is an ending. We have no happy ending. Even when we have a happy ending, there's more after the story, like Tolkien's. For some reason, I also think Tolkien just couldn't end his story. He just wanted to keep talking about his characters. He lived with them so long that he's like, I know what they're going to do next, and I'm just going to keep going.
Ooh, a little literary debate here. We'll save that for next time.
Yeah, and I know that he also likes, he's not somebody that likes asymmetry so much, where it's like, yeah, it's not going to be the same Shire he left when he came back. So, but that's the thing is, a cheap story has asymmetry, where it's like everything has been resolved at the end.
But then
it's
you
just
don't
like
have
the
any
beginning.
growth or don't.
But you got no growth. But that's a happy ending because you don't care what happens anymore. You're resolved. Oh, they're happy. It's done.
Happily ever after.
Exactly.
And what we tell children, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But anyway, so and bittersweet again at the end of that movie. Spoilers for anybody that's watched that hasn't seen it. Peter's on his own. And it's nobody remembers who he is anymore.
Oh, that's right.
But it's the right thing.
Yeah, it was.
It was the right choice for that character to make to solve his problem, because it wasn't, what weapon do I need to use to win? It's a choice he had to make.
Yeah,
and it mattered, and it changed all of his life, but
it made right everybody else.
Made right everybody else.
Yeah, dude, I got.
So I'm not a great fan of the movie for other reasons, but I really respected that ending.
Yeah,
I really respected that.
Ms. Haylie, any closing thoughts? That was, and just really briefly, we'll have a part 2 of this at some point. So if we're knocking on any doors, that is people listening, if you're like, wait, what? We'll expand on more.
No. I said my piece.
All that Cinderella talk was good, and Beauty and the Beast talk. Well, thank you guys. Thank you, Arts team, for spending this time unpacking story. Heavy topics, though, about evil in the world, but what do we do with that? So I really appreciate this conversation, but also your guys' thoughts, who you guys are, and that you have these deep thoughts and these things that you wrestle with, and that you wrestle with those here at our church. And speaking to you, our audience, you guys listening here, thank you for listening to our podcast, for interacting with us, and for coming Sunday to Sunday. Or if you don't live in the area, watching us online. Which reminds me, you can find us online if you're on YouTube. How's that for a transition? Little left-hand turn, as they say. You can find us on YouTube by searching for Neighborhood Church of Los Alamitos or Neighborhood Church of Cypress. And you can also find us on Instagram and Facebook under those same handles. Also, some of the content that we were talking about, the movie titles, lectures, and things like that, you can find links to all of those on our website, which is neighborhoodchurch.com/revive. So if you type that in, then you can find this podcast and then some of the movies that we talked about, some links to those. Also, we would love to hear from you guys. You can email us at connect@neighborhoodchurch.com, which is CONNECT@neighborhoodchurch.com. Until next time, we're going to be praying for you guys, and we hope that God revives your soul.